What is up, people? We are back on Heart of Thorns. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the elite specializations that exist now that the game is out. We're not going to be talking about all of them, but the ones I've at least tampered with. I'm really just going to do a build video. I guess I'll leave it at that. Most of you know what each one does to an extent. So I'm just going to do kind of a sample build, quick and easy type of thing. And like I've always said, they're blueprints. They're not end-all be-all, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Let's get right into it. These are supposed to be quick. The Reaper is the creature I've had the most experience with. It is my main character, and I use him in PvE. As such, I do have him spec'd for dungeons mostly. I use the Spite, Soul Reaping, and Reaper trait lines. Not much is different from what most people would do. Chilling inflicts vulnerability, Rending Shroud, Close to Death. A lot of these are fairly standard for most Reaper builds. Unyielding Blast, I sometimes switch with Soul Marks because I do use a staff. And if my group can already supply max vulnerability without the need for it, it just gets my Reaper Shroud back up quicker. I spend most of my time in Reaper Shroud, so the faster I can get it out, the better. Vital Persistence, Doomfire is huge in my build, as I'll show you when we get going. For Reaper, I do tend to use Augury of Death because I do tend to use a lot of shouts, but I sometimes switch to Chilling Nova when I know I'm not going to be using them. Decimate Defenses is a keystone because since I don't have Death Perception, Decimate Defenses is how I max out my crit, which means I have to keep the vulnerability on, and then I sometimes switch between Reaper's Onslaught and Blighter's Boon. Blighter's Boon did just get a nerf where your boons are the only ones that heal you, not your allies' boons. So, but I still sometimes use it if I need to be more survivable. My gear, it works with all sorts of gear. If you want to be more survivable than I've built, using Valkyrie gear works nicely. What I do, I switch between, and I actually literally switch in the middle of dungeons between Berserker gear and Sinister gear. The reason I do this is because if we go to Berserker gear here, Berserker gear is obviously really powerful when it comes to my greatsword, when it comes to clearing trash. Berserker gear is really good. On these I have, I believe, Rune of the Ogre, I have Berserker trinkets, I have Sigil of Air and of Night. So, Berserker greatsword does a lot of damage. However, when I switch into Reaper Shroud here, you'll see that my damage, say my life reap at the end there, is about 1600 for damage, for just Berserker's damage. If I switch to Sinister gear, and keep in mind this is without like minimal utility, minimal, I think I have a food buff on, but I don't know what it is. So I switch to Sinisters. I think I missed a piece. Yes, I did. So I have all Sinister gear on. I switch to my staff, which is a Giver staff, because that increases condition duration. And I go back in. That 1600 suddenly jumps up to 19, almost 2000 with the Doomfires, because of the way the Sinister gear works. Now, obviously Berserker gear, you have a much higher ferocity rating, which, let's see, this is 178. If I switch back to my Berserker gear, it comes out to about 200, so you get a 30% increase there. But when you have full food, if you were to switch these to Sinister Trinkets, I find that Doomfire condition seems to do a lot more damage. The same can be said for Soul Spiral. You see here 2,800 damage, 2,200 damage. So with Berserkers on, it deals about 5,000. And with Sinisters on, let's give it a minute to reload. It deals 4,500 and 2,500, which comes out to about 7,000. So the big issue with this, though, and I will point this out right now, is that Sinister gear makes your greatsword, which is kind of my secondary point of damage, total garbage. The damage is much weaker with Sinisters than it is with Berserkers. That's why I switch gear. When I'm clearing trash and I know I'm going to be using my Berserker or my Greatsword a lot, I use my Berserker's gear. When I get to a boss fight where it's a longer fight, the conditions are going to have the full time to play out and do all their damage, and I know the mechanics enough that I don't have to worry about, staying in and out of Reaper Shroud. I can dodge enough to maintain my Reaper Shroud for a while. I switch to the Sinister gear and then train face, which usually I have my other foods on. If I were to have my full might and vulnerability stacks, this would be even better. Right now, condition damage is only 664. That's mainly because of the runes. I don't have, like I said, I do not have a, I have a Giver staff. I do not have a the condition damage staff, because condition, in all the numbers I've ever pumped, condition duration seems to do better than condition damage in this case. I mean, I'll have to test that at a different point, but for now, it's not worth me going and fondling with. So, as for skills, I use Greatsword and Staff. That seems obvious. I've been switching between them. Greatsword, because half the reason I play the Reapers, because I like the Greatsword. Gravedigger hits like a train when you're a Berserker. In Berserker's gear, you have nice vulnerability, you have a dark field that blinds and cripples, and you do great AoE damage. I use the Staff because it gives me quite a bit of versatility. It gives me a lot of... Obviously, the first skill can give a shitload of life force when there's a lot of enemies. You get 4.5% life force per enemy hit, which is freaking insane. It also has the physical projectile field, or finisher, for some extra damage. When I do have my traded, when I am traded to have Marks be unblockable and gain life force here, it does help get me back up into Reaper Shroud when I'm in a boss fight. Obviously, regen and bleeding with condition damage, a little bit better. Putrid Mark is good condition removal. Reaper's Mark obviously chills, fears, vulnerability, that type of stuff. And like I said, these all give me life force. The big one, though, is Chillblains. Chillblains is a poison field. So, not only does it deal that 1500 damage you see there with poison, it actually creates a poison field for my Soul Spiral in Reaper Shroud, which means that rather than only giving 12 stacks of poison, it can give anywhere from, 20 to, if there's enough enemies, nearly 100 poison stacks. Maybe not quite that high, but a lot of fucking poison stacks, which means it's a lot of fucking damage. So, that's why I use my Staff. Having the condition removal on the Staff means I don't necessarily have to have it here. Though I will say I switch these skills like a fucking madman. It's not even... this is just how they happen to be when I logged on. I probably should switch that. So, right now, this is kind of... I think I had just gotten done a Fractal when I got offline last night. This is kind of what I do when I'm in Sinister mode, when I'm in Condition Dealing mode. This is the setup I have. Your Soul is Mine is by far probably one of the best heals we have. When you're traded with Augury to give it the 18-second cooldown, plus when you hit foes with it, the cooldown goes even lower. You're literally getting a 4,500 heal on top of 5% life force and then 3% life force per enemy around you. So I think this is by far our best heal. Well of Suffering does good damage, applies invulnerability, obviously good thing to have. You are all weaklings. It gives me might, which is nice, but I mainly tend to use it as a stun breaker. Not that that's absolutely necessary. I do switch this out all the time, like I said. Fleshworm I tend to use because it deals damage over time on its own. It does poison. It does deal poison damage when it does blow up. And it's another stun breaker. I don't know if many of you have ever used the Fleshworm, but if I'm stuck here doing something and I get stunned and that happens to be right next to them, if I'm at a distance using my Staff and I want to go into Reaper Shroud, I can just hit this button, break the stun, teleport over, it does the poison damage, and I can go right into Reaper mode. It also gives me 10% life force when I do use it, so that's another big reason why I use it. It does have a blast finisher, so if I use Chillblains and then use this, it will have an added effect. Other skills I'll use, if I need global condition removal, I do use Well of Power. Well of Blindness is nice for some survivability. Added Might with Blood is Power is nice. Corrosive Poison Cloud is a really nice one if you're not using a Staff. If you want to get those extra poison bolts on the Soul Reaper or on Soul Spiral, this not only does a good chunk of damage, but it puts down the poison field and weakens your enemies. Like I said, I use these skills all sorts of different ways. I am a human necromancer, so I do use Reaper of Grenth a lot. The poison damage is nice. Obviously, it doesn't look that nice because did I put the Berserker gear? Nope, I'm in Sinister gear. Each stack of poison deals 300 damage, and I believe it stacks 15 times. So that ends up coming out to 315. That's about 4,500 damage. I only use this in certain situations, though. It does stack vulnerability as well, but a lot of times I use Fleshworm because if you don't know, this thing can take down break bars like it's nobody's business. Lich Form I use when I have to be at ranged. Plague I use underwater, and if I'm going to be fighting a lot of fucking creatures and I know I'm going to need it. Chilled to the Bone I haven't used a ton of yet. It does have a reduced cooldown with Augury, It does apply. It does give me good stability, and it does give a heavy chilled. But I just haven't gotten around to using it or finding a niche for it. So that's kind of my build in a nutshell. I'm still messing around with things. We'll see. I've had a set of Sinister gear and Berserker gear for a while, so we're testing the waters to see if I'm going to just stick with one or if I'm going to be switching back and forth for the rest of my life. Anyway, though, I think I covered everything. That's all I wanted to talk about. Leave comments below with questions. I know I kind of ranted quickly, so any questions you have, any tips you have for other players, any questions as to why I built a certain way, as long as it's worded politely, I will probably respond. And as always, like, subscribe, and let me know what you want to see, and I will see you guys next time.